Today, we're diving into a mental health crisis that's reshaping an entire generation. Why are Gen Z, those born between 1997 and 2012, experiencing anxiety at unprecedented rates? We'll explore the perfect storm of factors, creating what researchers call the most anxious generation, and examine how systemic failures are translating into individual suffering.
Sam, what we're seeing is remarkable and deeply concerning. Over 60% of Gen Z report significant anxiety symptoms. That's nearly double the rate of previous generations at the same age. But what's particularly striking is their openness about it. They're the first generation to normalize conversations about mental health, which gives us unprecedented insight into their struggles.
For us, anxiety isn't just a personal issue, it's a rational response to the world we've inherited. We're dealing with climate disasters, mass shootings, impossible housing costs, and student debt that previous generations didn't face at our age. The question isn't why we're anxious, it's how we're supposed to not be.
The data tells a complex story. A 2024 study shows Gen Z spends an average of 5 hours daily on social media, and those with over 3 hours of daily use show significantly higher anxiety rates. We're seeing constant social comparison, cyberbullying, and information overload creating a neurological environment that's essentially anxiety-inducing by design.
Dr. Martinez, let's start with the numbers. What exactly are we seeing in terms of Gen Z anxiety rates, and how does this compare to previous generations?
The statistics are staggering. A recent Harmony Healthcare IT study found 61% of Gen Z has been medically diagnosed with anxiety. That's compared to roughly 40% reporting anxiety symptoms. The Walton Family Foundation found 42% struggle with depression, nearly double the rate of Americans over 25. What's particularly concerning is that 22% of high schoolers seriously considered suicide in 2021, up from 29% reporting persistent sadness in 2011 to 42% in 2021.
Those numbers represent real people, my friends, my peers. What older generations don't always understand is that our anxiety often feels completely rational. When 75% of us experience climate anxiety that affects our daily lives, when we're doing active shooter drills in school, when we're told we might never afford homes, this isn't irrational fear. This is a logical response to an illogical world.
Marcus raises a crucial point about rational versus pathological anxiety. Our research shows that 69% of Gen Z social media users feel anxious about the future after consuming climate content online. The algorithms amplify crisis information because it drives engagement, creating what we call manufactured urgency. Their brains are constantly in fight-or-flight mode from information that previous generations received occasionally through newspapers or evening news.
Dr. Rodriguez, walk us through social media's role. How exactly is constant connectivity rewiring young brains for anxiety?
Think of it as a perfect storm for anxiety development. Gen Z averages 5 hours daily on social media. That's constant social comparison, FOMO, and exposure to curated perfect lives. Studies show that social media algorithms prioritize emotionally charged content, including crisis information. When you combine this with developing teenage brains that are already hypervigilant to social rejection, you create an environment where anxiety becomes the default neurological state.
What's really messed up is how social media makes individual problems feel collective and collective problems feel personal. I see my friends struggling financially and suddenly my own financial stress feels worse. I see climate disasters in real time and I feel personally responsible for not doing enough. We're carrying the emotional weight of global crises in our pockets 24/7.
Marcus highlights something critical: the collapse of traditional boundaries. Previous generations had clear separations between local and global, personal and political, work and rest. Gen Z experiences everything simultaneously and personally. They see injustice and feel obligated to respond. They witness global warming and feel personally culpable. This creates what we call chronic activation. Their nervous systems never fully relax.
Let's talk about economic factors. Marcus, how does financial stress specifically manifest for your generation?
It's crushing. Gen Z debt makes up 16% of our income compared to 12% for millennials at our age. With average starting salaries around $39,000 and debt factored in, we're looking at effective income of about $33,000 less for women. We're told to work hard and buy homes, but median home prices have exploded while wages stagnated. Nearly half of us live paycheck to paycheck, and 46% rely on parents financially. The American dream feels like a historical artifact.
The economic anxiety creates a cascading effect. When basic survival needs feel uncertain, housing, healthcare, student loans, it activates primitive fear responses. Studies show that financial stress directly correlates with anxiety disorders. But for Gen Z, it's not just personal financial stress. They're also inheriting environmental and social debts from previous generations. They feel simultaneously responsible for problems they didn't create and powerless to solve them.
Social media amplifies this economic anxiety through constant lifestyle comparison. Gen Z sees influencers with luxury apartments and exotic travels, not knowing these are often sponsored or financed through debt. 72% report that societal expectations create financial trauma. They're measuring their reality against manufactured digital perfection while dealing with unprecedented economic challenges.
Marcus, climate anxiety specifically seems to be a defining feature of your generation's mental health landscape. How does eco-anxiety manifest day to day?
Climate anxiety is like carrying grief for a future that's dying. A BBC study found 75% of young adults feel intense worry about climate change. For me, it shows up as guilt about everyday choices, flying to see family, even driving to work. It's also this overwhelming sense of urgency paired with powerlessness. We see the science, we see the timeline, and we see older generations who seem to care more about quarterly profits than our future.
Climate anxiety represents a new category of existential dread. Unlike previous generations who worried about nuclear war as an abstract possibility, Gen Z is watching climate change unfold in real time through social media. They see wildfires, floods, and extreme weather constantly. Research shows 45% say climate anxiety affects their daily functioning. Many report not wanting children because they're terrified of the world they'd inherit.
What's particularly tragic is how eco-anxiety intersects with developmental needs. Young adults are supposed to be forming optimistic visions of their futures, making career plans, considering families. Instead, they're processing existential dread about whether there will be a habitable planet. This creates what we call anticipatory grief, mourning losses that haven't happened yet but feel inevitable.
Dr. Martinez, what about the role of collective trauma? This generation has lived through some unprecedented events.
Gen Z has experienced more collective trauma than any recent generation. They lived through 9/11's aftermath, endless wars, the 2008 financial crisis impacting their families, school shootings becoming routine, COVID-19 disrupting their formative years, and social justice movements highlighting systemic inequities. Each event creates cumulative stress, but they've never had recovery periods. It's been crisis after crisis during critical brain development years.
COVID especially broke something fundamental for us. Our teenage years and early 20s, supposed to be about freedom, exploration, social connection, got canceled. We lost graduations, first jobs, dating, travel. Then we were told to get back to normal, but normal never existed for us. We're mourning experiences we never had while being expected to perform optimism about futures that feel increasingly impossible.
The digital documentation of trauma makes it particularly intense for Gen Z. Previous generations might have read about distant tragedies. Gen Z watches them unfold in real time on TikTok. They see police violence, mass shootings, climate disasters not as abstract news, but as immediate, visceral experiences. The algorithms ensure that traumatic content gets maximum exposure because it drives engagement.
Let's talk solutions. Dr. Martinez, what therapeutic approaches are proving effective for Gen Z anxiety?
Traditional approaches need adaptation for Gen Z's unique challenges. We're seeing success with trauma-informed care that acknowledges their collective trauma experiences. Somatic therapies help with the constant nervous system activation. But critically, we need approaches that validate their rational concerns. Their anxiety often reflects real threats that need systemic solutions, not just individual coping strategies.
What helps me most is action-oriented therapy. My therapist doesn't just tell me to practice mindfulness about climate change, she helps me channel that anxiety into activism. When therapy acknowledges that some of our anxiety is rational and helps us find agency rather than just acceptance, it actually works. We need therapy that honors our values and helps us act on them, not just cope with helplessness.
Digital wellness interventions are crucial. We're working on app-based interventions that help Gen Z build healthier relationships with technology, setting boundaries, curating feeds for mental health, recognizing when social media use becomes compulsive. But individual solutions aren't enough. We need platform design changes that prioritize user well-being over engagement.
What about systemic solutions? What needs to change at societal levels?
We need a complete reframe. Instead of asking, why is Gen Z so anxious? We should ask, why wouldn't they be anxious in these conditions? We need economic policies addressing housing affordability, student debt forgiveness, livable wages. We need climate action that gives young people hope. We need social media regulation, prioritizing mental health over profits. Their anxiety is a symptom of systemic dysfunction.
Exactly. Stop pathologizing our responses to genuine threats. Give us climate action, affordable housing, and economic security, and watch our anxiety rates drop. The mental health crisis is inseparable from the housing crisis, the climate crisis, and the inequality crisis. You can't therapy your way out of structural problems.
We also need educational institutions to teach digital literacy and emotional regulation as core life skills. Gen Z needs tools to navigate information overload, recognize manipulation in media, and build healthy relationships with technology. These should be considered public health interventions, not individual responsibilities.
What gives you hope about this generation's approach to mental health?
Their openness is revolutionary. 39% of Gen Z has sought therapy compared to 26% of Gen X and 22% of baby boomers. They're normalizing mental health conversations, demanding workplace mental health support, and refusing to suffer in silence. They're also connecting their personal healing to social justice, understanding that individual wellness requires collective action.
We're not just accepting anxiety as inevitable, we're organizing, advocating, and creating mutual aid networks. My anxiety about climate change led me to activism, which actually helped my mental health because I felt empowered rather than helpless. We're proving that you can acknowledge real threats while still fighting for change.
They're also developing remarkable digital wisdom. Many Gen Z are self-regulating their social media use, curating feeds for mental health, and creating online communities focused on healing rather than consumption. They understand technology's double-edged nature better than any previous generation and are actively working to harness its benefits while minimizing its harms.
What would you want older generations to understand about Gen Z anxiety?
Our anxiety isn't weakness, it's awareness. We see the problems you've left us and refuse to pretend everything's fine. Instead of telling us to calm down or be grateful, listen to what our anxiety is telling you about the world you've created. Then help us fix it. We're not broken, the systems are broken.
Gen Z's anxiety represents both a crisis and an opportunity. They're forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths about inequality, environmental destruction, and social dysfunction. Their willingness to name these problems and demand solutions offers hope for systemic change. We should see their anxiety as valuable information about what needs fixing, not just symptoms to suppress.
This generation is teaching us that mental health is inseparable from social justice, environmental health, and economic security. They're showing us that healing requires both individual support and collective action. If we listen to them and act on their insights, we might actually create a world where future generations can thrive without chronic anxiety.
Dr. Martinez, Dr. Rodriguez, Marcus, thank you for this important conversation. You've shown us that Gen Z anxiety isn't just a mental health issue, it's a mirror reflecting the human cost of our choices as a society. Their courage in naming these truths, despite the personal toll, offers hope that we can build a world worthy of their remarkable resilience. This episode was brought to you by Unstruct AI, where we explore the human cost of our systems and choices. Today we've seen how generational anxiety reveals the price of ignoring systemic problems, and how those paying that price are also leading the way toward solutions.